Hello and welcome to First Flight, a Star Trek Enterprise rewatch podcast where we are watching and discussing each episode of Enterprise in succession. First Flight is a proud member of the Tricorder Transmissions Network.
This is Commander Tucker of Enterprise. We've got some information you're going to want to hear.
Welcome, Enterprise fans. I'm your co-host, Chris.
And I'm your co-host, Abby.
And tonight, we are discussing The Communicator, the 8th episode of Season 2. I can't believe it's only been 8 episodes that we've been talking about, Abby. This, and in a good way. Like, I feel like we've been doing this for a while, and it's been fantastic. So 8 means we have so much more to talk about this season, which has me excited.
Absolutely.
This episode, The Communicator, was written by Rick Berman and Brennan Braga, with a teleplay by Andre Bormanis, and was directed by James A. Conter. It aired on November 13th, 2002. But before we begin our discussion, we need to issue a read alert.
Tactical alert. All hands to stations.
There are potential spoilers ahead. We might end up talking about any part of the series at any time, so you have been warned. And now for a summary of the episode, it's time for the Captain's Log. Okay, Abby, let's go.
Captain's Star Log Supplemental.
All right, here's my summary of The Communicator. When Reed accidentally leaves his communicator behind on a pre-warp planet, the attempt to retrieve it lands him and Archer in an alien prison.
All right, it's time to deploy our subspace amplifiers and get into this episode. We'll start with a quick chat about the cold open and then head into our pros and decons section. Each of us will share 3 of our favorite parts of this episode, and then if there are things that don't quite gel with us, we'll have a discussion on any decons from the episode. You might hear a dog bark in this discussion if somebody's Porthos Pick is mentioned, but we'll still discuss them later on.
All right, so let's get into this episode. We, as always, start with the cold open, one of my favorite parts. So, Chris, why don't you chat a little bit about your thoughts on how this episode starts?
It starts with a shuttle pod. Those shuttle pods, an amazing, simple, minimalist design. I think it's one of the best auxiliary crafts in Star Trek because it's so simple and has those little wings. And I think I've talked about that before. So I love when a cold open starts with a shuttle pod, and we do get a bunch of exposition filling us in on what they've experienced on the planet, their observations, pulling off the prosthetics once they get back on Enterprise. That's really cool. And then once Reed discovers that he's missing his communicator, just that anxiety, that moment when he's patting down all of his pockets and stuff.
Yeah.
We've all been there, like looking for our keys or our phone now. So I really connected with that moment, that kind of anxiety, like propped up in my chest for a moment in the best kind of way. So I love this cold open. It does a lot of work, and it has some fun moments, relaxed moments between Archer and Malcolm and Hoshi.
Yeah, I agree. This was a really fun one. For as short as it is, you get a great exposition dump. You do see those relationships. You get kind of the pivot change when you feel that anxiety with, and I was thinking not only would it be my phone or my keys, I was thinking back to when my girls were little and it was, oh my God, where's the pacifier? Do I have a clean one in my pocket? When you have a kid who's screaming somewhere and you're like frantic, like, I put 3 in this bag, where are they? And I felt that again when they were going through right after the opening credits and they're like tearing up everything in the shuttlecraft, feeling in the seats. Malcolm's in the trash can looking under the bag liner. And I was like, oh man, every parent has been there with either a pacifier or a lost stuffed animal or a special blanket or something. So I resonated with that deeply.
Or every teacher, where's my marker?
Yeah.
Where did I put my marker?
Yeah, exactly. I also wanted to call out how I really liked the makeup in this one. And one of the things that I noticed that it took me a minute and a couple watchings to be like, why do I feel like Malcolm looks so much more like an alien than the other two do with this makeup on? Like they all obviously look like they've got the little prosthetics and they've got the spots and all that. But I'm like, why is it Malcolm that's just making me look, wow, he's so different looking like that? And I realized that he's one of those people who looks extra strange without eyebrows.
Mhm.
And when you see him later on, I realized how much face acting that we have with our eyebrows, and with him, with that particular actor, Dominic Keating just uses his eyebrows so much in his face acting, which I hadn't noticed until he didn't have them. And that's one of the reasons I felt he looked so alien. That, and they smushed his hair down instead of normal, and for some reason it looked so different on him. So I wanted to call that out as a really nice, unintentional perhaps, but piece of the makeup in there. And those beautiful costumes with all the like braids that connect the two sides of the vests and
Yeah.
down the sides, really nice details. And I like that later on it feels like those little straps and braids and tassels were there because as we see them get into more of a perilous situation and there's been fighting, some of them that get ripped or torn or are hanging, and they stay that way, and it's just kind of a nice way to have a
Oh,
quick visual reminder that they'd been through things.
I love when those kind of production details tell story. And
Yes.
that's really good. That's a really good observation, Abby. Excellent.
Well, costumes are my thing.
I know they are, yeah. Um, so when you were talking about Malcolm and his eyebrows and how critical eyebrows are for face acting,
Hmm.
I can't help it, but my mind went to LeVar Burton,
Oh yeah.
right? All had like his eyebrows were essential. And
Yep.
because he didn't have his eyes, so like
Yep.
he's probably the master of the eyebrow acting because
Yeah.
that's all he had as a tool to really project emotions, and probably had to
Yeah.
really overact his eyebrows, which is not something I've thought about before, but I could see him doing it in my mind now. So sorry, I know this is an enterprise podcast, but whenever we can connect it to everything else, I think it makes everything better as a franchise.
And well, and LeVar Burton makes everything better. He's a personal hero of mine for both
I know, yeah.
being, yeah, a passionate about children's literacy and
Hmm.
about Star Trek and science and pushing for social change. So we could talk about LeVar Burton for an entire bonus episode someday, and it will be wonderful.
Yeah, I think he just was executive producer of a new literacy documentary that just recently came out.
Yeah, it's a good one.
I haven't seen it yet. You've seen it?
I've seen it. It's amazing.
What's it called?
I,
Oh no.
Rainbow, The Right to Read, and it's
Okay.
about American literacy and how we teach it and how we approach it, and his passion that all kids be literate. And
Hmm.
he calls literacy equitable to freedom, which is beautiful.
100%. Yeah. Yeah.
All
Okay,
right,
so
so off my soapbox, let's jump into some pros, because obviously LeVar Burton is a pro. But back to our episode. What's your first pro on the Communicator, Chris?
so my first pro is that scene when they're being interrogated. Oh, Malcolm and Archer are being interrogated by the military
Hmm.
officers, and Malcolm has to improvise this whole genetically engineered cover story for who they are and why their anatomy is so different. And I just love how he just basically makes them Suliban. and really the whole
Yeah.
scene is fun where Archer is playing into it, and like he's like laughing. He's like, man, our
Intelligence reports underestimate you, General. Alien creatures. You're even more delusional than we thought. This isn't a spaceship. It's suborbital. A highly experimental aircraft. We've been observing your territory for months.
They do a good job at improvising. And Malcolm's line specifically about,
Improvisation isn't my strong suit.
You made us sound like the Suliban.
makes me think
Yeah.
of Tuvok, because Tuvok has said that line Man, what was it in?
Is it the Fast and Prosper?
No, it wasn't that one. It's
No.
oh, it might be that one. Yeah, it is that one. Live
I
fast
think
and
it isn't
prosper.
it when she yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
hmm Some kind
yeah.
of psoriasis. Yes, in the prisons.
Exactly.
Okay, it's going back.
Yeah.
Psoriasis?
Improvisation is not foremost among my talents.
Considering I caught you off guard, I thought your performance was exemplary.
Thank you, Captain. Was your order to call the Telsians part of the deception, or did you actually want me to contact them?
Not yet. Let's give Dala some time to think about those barbaric prisons.
Do you believe she'll relent?
I'm not sure. Something tells me she's just as stubborn as I am.
Then am I to assume you have an alternative plan?
I'm like you, Tuvok, making it up as I go along.
When Malcolm said that line, I was totally, yes, this is awesome. Definitely a pro. And hey, again, security officer. Well, armory officer and a tactical security officer, but kind of similar. So yeah, it's my first pro. It's a simple one, but I love that scene. It's fun. And that connection to Tuvok always makes something a win. What is your first pro?
Well, it's kind of a perfect segue because my first pro is the relationship between Archer and Malcolm in this one and how it shows the growth not only from the beginning of the series, but I like how it kind of mirrors them and when we had Minefield and he was attached and they're talking and that was the first time that they were truly vulnerable with each other. And then all the scenes that they're in here, once they go back down to the planet and they get captured, they're immediately able to find that space of honesty and vulnerability again. And I think that's because of the events from Minefield. And while they don't really whisper for the guards, the conversation that they have there about what if we did tell the truth and all of this, and I'm not afraid of death and all this, they are able to do this in a way that would have been difficult had they not already had that experience. And of course, all of first season as well. But I just really enjoyed seeing them together again in just a few episodes later so that they could capitalize on the growth that was made there. And we see that here. And I think that's just a really neat thing. And I love one of my favorite parts of this is when Archer goes, "Hey, I'm sorry that you're not going to get to write that report," which, side note, I wonder if he really actually did then. And then Malcolm was like, "Maybe I still will. I'm expecting a landing party to burst through that door at any time." And I always just kind of expect him to say, because that's what I'd be doing for our crew, because they understand each other now that way, that, you know, we are a family. Of course they're going to come rescue us. But he didn't have to say it because there's this long beat and a look between them right there that says that. And Archer then kind of just gives this tiny little nod like, yeah, you're right. We can still, you know, hope for our family to come rescue us. And I just loved those moments of those two men together like that, being as open and honest with each other as they were.
Yeah, that's that kind of vulnerability between these two men is not done enough in just TV in general. And so I do appreciate that, especially with a character like Reed. Like Archer, he is charismatic and can connect with a lot of people, but Reed is that, you know, kind of withdrawn, you know, quiet business guy. And this one, he drops the business pretty quickly when they're in that cell together. And he's sharing, you know, his fears. So again, like you said, that serialization from Minefield to this is so impressive and so subtle that it might be lost on first-time viewers, but the way we're watching it with a close eye, it really rewards us. And it reminds me of Strange New Worlds approach, although Strange New Worlds approach is a lot more amped up and more obvious in its serialization. But again, it's separate episodic stories, but the character connections continue through them.
Exactly.
So that is really, really cool. Great pick. Which segues great to my next pick.
Oh, look at us, like butter.
Yeah, it's like I mean, 8 times in, we're good. I think it's been a little bit more than 8 because we did a few extras, but yeah. So serialization is a big part of my next pick, which is the Suliban cell ship, which they picked up a long time ago, and apparently Trip's been working on it in his off hours, which is awesome. I love that they remember these things and then use them. It's like Chekhov's gun. Like, we got this cell ship. When are we going to use it? They
Yeah.
got the perfect time to use it. And it creates a wonderful sequence at the end of this episode that is just fun and probably was simple to shoot, although it looks cool. But the real thing is with that Suliban ship, that the scenes between Trip and Travis are gold.
Yeah.
Both kind of chill characters. Both of them are kind of chill characters and like easy to get along with characters. And I love seeing them working together, and specifically the fun of Trip's arm being cloaked is really cool.
Yeah.
And then Travis's movie night joke about having a hand cloaked and it comes in handy. He's like, oh, so you can steal popcorn. But we know that's not what he meant. So like we finally
Exactly.
we get some characterization from Travis. He tells jokes, he's playful, that's great. And we get some fun moments with Trip, which pays off later with that final scene with a little hole, in his hand in sickbay. So we've had like some lighter moments with Trip in previous episodes, like the 7th, but it didn't go anywhere. And we had issues with that, and it weakened the character. But this didn't. It was just fun. And it just made me think that Trip, is he the O'Brien of Enterprise? You know what I mean? Although his are just silly
Yeah.
things, like he's got a nipple on his wrist, part of his hands cloaked, like those kind of situations keep happening to him.
I think like he and Travis share it. He gets the silly ones, and Travis gets killed or maimed or injured or kidnapped.
Oh yes.
So if you put the two of them together, they would make Miles.
But Travis is usually unconscious when he has to go through those situations. And so like that's what O'Brien is conscious usually through all the bad things.
True. Well, listeners, weigh in. Who do you think is the Miles O'Brien of Enterprise? That would be super fair for our mailbag show. So throw some ideas our way or back up one of our picks. All right. So I love that pick. I think it is a really fun way for, in a very serious episode, to have a little bit of levity, but it doesn't feel unjustified. And it is really fun to see those two men together, and you can tell that they have a real respect for each other and a real friendship, and that it has grown. And that's another pairing that I wish we saw more often. I wish that they got to do more together, because it would have been so much fun. The jokes would have been a lot denser between these two than it would be between Trip and Malcolm, that's for sure.
Yes.
But but yeah, I think this is a really neat one too, because again, it shows how these two are in there, they're working hard, they're joking, they're getting frustrated, but they keep going. But as soon as they need to turn and make it happen, they do. They're like, all right, we got this. Which is kind of funny, because we're segueing into my second pro right now, which is, I love that the team back on the ship pretty much just kick butt. I love this whole Suliban plot, but I also love like how Hoshi is in on everything, how T'Pol is working with them. Like, they have got all of these pieces. They're talking in shorthand, and these are not. I mean, T'Pol is second in command, but this group is not the group that usually makes all of the big decisions. They're missing the captain and the tactical specialist, and they're making these big decisions to make this big rescue plan and to do all this, cool stuff. And they are doing it like, oh, the well-oiled machine they are. They have been through enough together that they're ready to go. And Malcolm was 100% right down in that cell, that they're going to come and rescue them. They absolutely are. And Archer was completely right, saying if it doesn't work, T'Pol's going to find a way to get everything, including our remains, off this planet. Like they knew down on the planet that the team up there was going to kick butt, and they really did. And I appreciate that. I like episodes that have everyone involved. And even this one, Flax was involved and had a great bit because of the whole cloaked hand. So we got everybody in this one. Everyone had some meat, and I appreciate that.
And all the B stories or whatever were all connected to the A very clearly, right? So
Yes.
yeah, great pick.
All right, well, let's move on to your third one, Chris. Round out your picks.
Yeah, it's the alien aircraft dogfight scene. That was just fun. And they looked like, X-Wings, or really, I think some fighter ships from the prequels, perhaps. Episode 3, I think. So very Star Wars like aircraft, and that dogfight with the shuttle pod, again, awesome. I mean, that's all there is to say. They were just cool.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And it's one of those times where we talk a lot about how there are certain moments of certain episodes you don't look away from. And I feel like those are moments you don't look away from. They're just cool. And that's
Eye
exactly it.
candy.
And that helps, yeah, that helps balance for me the fact that I hate watching people get beaten. So like there are moments of this episode that I do want to turn away from. And since I rewatched multiple times before we talk, sometimes I do on the second and third. I'm like, I will watch it once because there might be details that I need to notice, but then I can just hear this couple seconds. I don't need to watch that. So it's nice to have these moments where I'm like, I am 100% watching that every single time I watch this.
Yes.
It's quite the balance in this episode.
Yes, definitely. So what is your final pick? Your final pro?
Okay, well, my final pro is the Archer and T'Pol chat in the end. And I think this is where you had your Star Trek moment where they're talking about how you don't have to leave technology to contaminate a culture. And what I really like about this is, yes, obviously this is about that, but it's also about their relationship. And that when T'Pol tells him, you were willing to die to protect these people, I didn't expect that. That is so big. That is such. She didn't have to stop and say that, but she knew how much her saying that to him would mean, and how that would help ease how awful he was feeling, because he knew that he had messed up a lot. And he was feeling terribly guilty about it, even though he tried to fix it the best he could. And she knew what to do to make him feel, that little chunk better. And that is this relationship that has been growing over this first season and a third. And I really, really like it.
Yeah, it's a shame there's so much friction between them, though.
Oh, we just, a night in
I'll give
sick
up.
bay.
I'll give up on that eventually. But you're right. I mean, that is a fantastic scene. It was hard for me not to pick that scene, because you're right. That is one of the Star Trek moments of the episode. Another one might be my Porthos pick, but yeah, that is a great scene, and again, highlighting this excellent team who are really becoming united in the way they think. Right.
Yep.
They can anticipate each other. And Archer throws out that thing, well, at least we got everything up. We fixed the contamination. But the way Bakula delivers that, that Archer doesn't believe it. And he's relying on her to tell him the truth. And she does. But then she also, using logic, recognizes the truth of his reality, of humanity, as an observer of humanity, right? That he has grown and done something impressive.
Yeah, it's a very nice way to put it.
All right, well, let's move on to the decons, the parts of the episode that just didn't gel with us. And Abby, let's start with you this time. Any decons?
I do, and most of mine are very, very small. So, first of all, every single time that I've watched this since the very first time, I remember watching it on air and going, "Why don't their scanners have silent mode? Like our cell phones do. Do you know how much easier it would be to be subtle about being, looking for things if you didn't hear the sound? Like that can't be a necessary for it to function." So it just
Yes.
always makes me shake my head. And I know it's plot. There's a reason, but it just come on, silent mode. We've all got them. So I would also like to say that this is another one of those times that you are very glad the bad guys are terrible shots, because there's a lot of them shooting and not one of them hits anybody. Like
Mm.
seriously, come on.
Mhm.
They must have taken their training from stormtroopers.
Yes.
I also wonder, my last little one, and then I'll do the one that I really want, is I wonder if Hoshi is in charge while everybody else goes down during the rescue, or is it Phlox? Because pretty much everybody else that we know is either on the planet or going down to the planet. So who's in charge on the ship? Like I always just kind of wonder that,
Mm.
because we just don't know anybody else who might be when those five people are not there. So I'm hoping it's Hoshi.
There are people that have higher rank than Hoshi because she's just an ensign, but she's also senior officer like Harry Kim. So it makes
Exactly.
a lot of sense that she would be in command at that time, which, gosh darn it, I want to see Hoshi
I
in that
know.
big chair being in command more.
I know. I
Yeah.
know. They started a little bit of it in season 4. If they had
Hmm.
had more seasons, I think we would have seen more moments like that.
Yes.
But all right, here's my last con, and this is every time I watch
Ah!
this episode. That
Sorry.
was fantastic.
Oh, goodness.
Whew. All right, so my last decon
Thank you.
is you're welcome. Is every time I watch this episode, I wish they had switched the last two scenes. I wish that they had taken that last sick bay scene where we see the hole that's still in Trip's hand and flip flopped it with the Archer and DePaul ready room scene, because I feel
Mm,
like if the humorous part had been first and then that serious ethical and that moment of deep connection and friendship between them had been the end, you would have been left with a completely different feeling about this
mm,
episode. But because
hmm.
they do the serious part and then they do the funny part, you're left with, oh, everything's hunky dory. That was fine. That was fun. And that's not what I feel like the point of this episode
Mm,
was. So I've
mm,
always wanted to just switch, not even switch the content at all, just switch the placement. It wouldn't
mm.
interrupt the flow at all from the scene before these two. And I think it would just make it a completely better episode because of just how it would leave you at the end.
Definitely. Yeah. I think we'll get into it later a little bit, but this episode lacks some of the weight that makes it a, a really strong episode. And I think you hit it there. Like it needed to end on that heavy, and like we were in the wrong, right?
Yeah.
And that we just have to swallow that sometimes and go out that way. And then that's the best kind of episodes where we're left thinking, you know.
Exactly.
So
And
this
you want
one
to
we're
talk to
left
someone about it the next day.
exactly. This one we're left with the, oh, that's funny. Look at the hole through his hand, which is great.
Right.
But you're right. I think that's a smart decon.
Well, how about you? What didn't gel with you this time, Chris?
Why can't they beam up the communicator?
I know.
I know they don't use transporters on humanoids because, well, they have and it's worked every time, but I know they just don't do that in
Exactly.
this era. But that's not a humanoid, it's a piece of technology.
Yep.
Now if they tried and said, oh my gosh, the soil, it has these minerals that deflect transporter beams, done, easy.
Right.
We've seen that a million times. So that's fine, but that wasn't there. So really the whole episode shouldn't have happened. So that's a huge decon, I think. I really did. Like that was the first thing I thought when I watched this episode this time around. I was like, oh, why aren't they beaming it?
And even if they would have had to go down because Hoshi's like, oh, we can't beam it until you locate it further within these 3 blocks. Like, but
Yes.
here's an amplifier for your pocket or whatever. They still could have had most of the episode, and they could have explained that the old transporters need better targets, whatever. But it would have made a better episode.
Yeah, that's a great thought. Absolutely. That we can't just target an object without it being tagged or something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not yet. These are the beginnings of the transporters.
Yeah, I love that. We always make it better. Hindsight is 2020.
Headcanon.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So my next one is just kind of a critique of the episode in its premise. I think it's kind of an unimaginative, kind of repetitive Star Trek story with a culture that really isn't interesting or unique or developed in any way. Right?
Yeah.
Like we get that episode dump in the beginning in the shuttle pod, which is good. That sets things up, but we don't really get much. Why do we care? And like, we don't see the consequences of this visit to the planet. I would love, maybe that would be a scene that goes at the end, where we see the military now arming to go wipe out the other side because they're fearing that they have all this technology. And so we're left with, oh my gosh, we instigated genocide. And that might be really heavy. But like, what there's just something missing about this planet. It wasn't interesting. Whereas when we were on the Marauders planet, that culture, those people were fully developed people that we cared about and connected with. And I didn't feel like a connection with these people.
Yeah, I agree. This is where that stereotype of alien of the week kind of comes in. Like, this is exactly why. Like, they're definitely aliens, but you couldn't really define them. This would be the extra hard question on a trivia challenge for Star Trek. Like, what was the name of this race? Because you don't remember them because they're not that exciting. They're just look a little bit different and have little. Yeah, exactly. I mean, they all dress in neutrals, so they're double bland.
Yeah. Well, and when TNG did First Contact, which is a similar kind of story, but it's done so much better, so much stronger. This episode is up against that, right? And I feel like there's a lot of, Blink of an Eye is similar too. So there's a lot of episodes that have this premise. And so I wouldn't be trying to approach this premise again unless I had a really fine-tuned and impactful story and culture to feature in the story.
I agree.
So, but I mean, it's not bad. I like the episode fine. It's just, it's kind of like been there, done that.
And done it better.
Yes. So, are we ready to dive into our favorite parts of the episode? The Porthos picks.
I do think I hear some dog barking.
If our picks were mentioned earlier in our discussion, which mine hasn't been, we will expand a bit more here. And if they weren't, then we have a few more great moments to discuss. So, Abby, I want to start with your Porthos pick. What's your favorite moment in this episode?
Well, one of the things that I like about this episode is I feel like it was intentionally put here to be another one of kind of the tent pole, we need a prime directive episodes that Enterprise has. And I feel like we come back to this one later this season and in, seasons further on, there's references back to this episode and the time that we lost the communicator. And like, it's a big thing for Malcolm. It isn't something he forgets.
Yeah.
It isn't something that the writers forget. So I think it's interesting because we're both agreeing that this episode is a little meh, but the fact that they keep coming back to it and that it really is a pivotal moment for Malcolm and his character development. Like, this is not a mistake he's making again, ever.
Yeah.
And you see that as part of his character growth. I really think that that very nebulous kind of thing is one of the reasons that I appreciate this episode even more now that I'm going back through these seasons with a fine-tooth comb, because I can see all the connections that these writers' rooms were doing.
Yeah, and definitely when an episode is referred to by later ones in a good way, it makes the episode stronger itself in the place of the whole narrative of the season. So yeah, I think that's important to call out, and I appreciate that.
All right, so what about you, Chris? What was your favorite part or moment of this episode?
Well, this is my Star Trek moment. It's when they are in that jail cell, not whispering in front of the guards.
Yes.
And Archer just considers the easy way out for a moment. He's laughing about having, dinner with the general, and they're all laughing about it. Or he's juxtaposing that with dying to preserve their culture. And I really appreciate Malcolm's line where he says, it's ironic.
Giving our lives to protect people who want to kill us.
It's a big planet, Malcolm. I'm sure they're not all like that.
I'm not afraid, sir.
Perfect.
It's powerful. It's such a great perspective. He says, it's a big planet, Malcolm. I'm sure they're not all like that.
Yeah.
Not much said at all. Very few lines, but there's Star Trek right there. Right? We can't put the blame on everyone for an isolated group of people. Can't generalize that way. And we can't condemn an entire planet because of a few people. In my Treks for All Time on yesterday's Enterprise, I really call out this idea of the sacrificial death done by a hero. This is kind of like a iconic realization of what a hero should be like. That's throughout our fiction. And we see that here. Archer is willing to die, sacrifice himself to safeguard others that won't even know he existed and or don't want him to exist. Right? That is an amazing mark of a hero that it isn't really talked about in this episode. It's just there, and it's incredible, and a really developing moment for me of this Archer character. And I appreciate that Reed calls it out, but he's willing to do it too. He's going along with his captain and supporting it. So that sacrificial death, which kind of is rooted in the Bible, is really powerful for me, and was my favorite moment of this episode, and elevates the episode quite a bit for me.
Yeah, that's a beautiful moment. And it was interesting because it had been a bit since I watched this episode the way it was meant to be watched. When I had COVID, I had this on the live Star Trek channel, and I kind of COVID dreamt my way through it and dreamt a whole bunch of stuff that wasn't there. Like, the doctor actually got their hands on these guys and was going to operate on them somewhere in my COVID head. And I kept waiting for that scene going, where was that? Oh my God, I think I dreamt that.
That's awesome.
It is and it isn't. It was really disconcerting at first. But when I got to that scene this time, I remember thinking to myself, yeah, even in my dream, that stood out. And that I was thinking to myself, this is a lesson we have still not learned. Like, you don't take a one or two or even a handful of people or examples and make them what you assume the entire group is. And that is such a lesson for now, still 20 years on. And I'm sure this will be a lesson exactly that will be needed in 200 more years. It's an important lesson. Even if this wasn't the most exciting version of it, it is always an important lesson.
Well, right. Like I've said in past episodes, like, it's a fine episode until we get scenes like this, and the last scene between T'Pol and Archer. This is the Star Trek moment. This is why Star Trek endures for 50 plus years, right? It's these moments that really look at the human condition and reality and add something to it, even if they're adding something that's been in conversation through fiction and literature and religious texts for generations. It's bringing it in a new light in a sci-fi context, which helps us see it differently.
Yeah. Well said.
Captain, I'm detecting a vessel closing on our position.
Columbia to Enterprise.
Greetings, Enterprise fans and First Flight crew. This is Melanie transmitting from the NX-02 Columbia with my thoughts on the Communicator. I've always really liked this episode. It's really solid. Even though it is tough to watch some of the brutality in this episode, there's really excellent storytelling here and good questions being asked. It's precedent setting, and that's what I like about it. It's asking questions about contamination and non-interference and visiting developing societies. And it's asking it in a really smart way with some great dialogue, great conversations, and I find it thought-provoking. Here are some of the things I love in this episode. I really like that outside aerial shot of the detention complex. That's a really cool set. We have Trip working on the Suliban ship in his free time and wanting to go down to the planet. I'm just like a regular bloodhound. Ah, Trip. And even though it seemed a bit out of character that Reed lost his communicator, you'd think there'd be some type of checklist around that. I do like that Archer says it could have been any of us. I love that about Archer. Malcolm and Archer's conversation in the brig before they're going to be executed. So great. Them grappling with this whole concept of what's the right thing to do and interfering and telling the truth and contaminating a culture and all of that. I love that brig scene. It's probably my Porthos pick. And I really like the end of it when Archer makes that final determination saying, we're doing the right thing. Archer at the last minute trying to save Malcolm from being executed. That's our Archer. This episode just keeps getting stronger as it nears towards the end. How badass was that whole rescue scene from the cloaked Suliban ship? Amazing. And then that final conversation between Archer and T'Pol. Another fantastic conversation, great writing, with them talking about what happened and her talking about his sacrifice at the end for the people. You don't have to leave technology behind to contaminate a culture is a very cool line. I love that scene and I like the way that ended the episode. So all in all, I enjoy this one. I think it's solid, but I think it gets stronger as the episode progresses. And while I kind of wish that they had taken Trip's disappearing hand a little more seriously, I'm giving the Communicator 8 out of 10 grapplers. And until next time, my friends, live long and prosper. Columbia out.
Accessing library computer data.
Well, here on First Flight, we love trivia and behind the scenes tidbits. So we pick a few to share about each episode. And I'm going to start tonight because I have one that I really like. So, well, I do, because a lot of people think this is a nitpick. And they say, you know, all the bars in the alien prison seem to be made out of wood. Like, you can actually see the grains in the wood sometimes. And you think, oh my God, they could just like kick through this if they both aimed well, and because it's made out of wood. And okay, maybe it was just being made wood because then it would look alien, but they mention when the doctor did all the reports and testing on them that they are allergic to iron, like because they figured that out because of the hemoglobin. So,
Yeah.
I mean, iron bars, which is what most jail cells that we think of are made of, would be toxic to them. Like they would never have iron. Now, obviously, there are many other types of metal. They could have some sort of weird alien metal that they had no iron. But I just think it was interesting. And I am pretty sure that that was just, you know, really subtle continuity adhering to the storyline and the plot there. And that's really cool. They did something like that. And, now that we're all watching on much better TVs than the original broadcast, you can see details like that. And I think that's fun.
Oh, like I said earlier, like when the production elements are telling the story in subtle ways,
Yeah.
that's incredible and should be lauded. Because that's a high commitment to professionalism and excellence that didn't have to be, included in their work. So well done, and a cool trivia piece to bring out.
So what is your piece of trivia, Chris?
So my piece is that the chairs in which Archer and Reed are sitting during the interrogation are the same design as Julian Bashir's interrogation chair on Romulus in that Deep Space Nine episode that has all the Latin words, inner arma enim silent legis, right?
Yeah, exactly like that.
Which also features an Intrepid class starship. Yay. But yeah, cool little, reuse of props. We're used to that by now in Star Trek, and I love it every single time that props are reused and repainted, and it just kind of makes us feel comfortable as fans. So not as cool as your pick, but a neat little one.
No, that is really fun. And I think that both times that they're being used as interrogation chairs. So obviously those are some scary looking, or at least very intense looking chairs. So that is fun.
Yeah. So, well, I think it's time for us to give our final thoughts and decide on a grappler rating. So, Abby, on a scale of 1 to 10 grapplers, how do you rate this episode?
All right. So I think that anyone who listened all the way through to this knows that this isn't going to be one that ends up probably in my top 5, but I do enjoy how connective it is. And where it is in the season, it is a middle part of the story. And I enjoy that. However, I have like I said, a hard time watching people being beaten. And there's a lot of that in this episode, which is just something that always kind of takes the spin off for me. And at the end, I'm like, yep, I've watched this one a bunch of times now for this, and I'm good with it for a while. So it comes out as a solid 7 of 10 for me. It's I'm really glad it's there. It's got some really great pieces. It's got some stuff that I kind of don't like, and I end up going, yep, it's a solid episode. So how about you, Chris?
It's a 7 out of 10 for me. It's solid. My teacher brain, like a 70 is a great score. You're average, So yeah, that's my same exact score. It's not amazing. It's pretty standard story that's been done many times and done much better. But the character moments between Archer and Malcolm are great. And again, that Star Trek moment is just piercing through to our humanity in an important way. So I give it a 7 out of 10.
It's always fun when we match.
Yeah.
All right. So before we finish up, let's go through a quick recap of our pros for the Communicator. Chris, run us down your list.
All right. My first pro was that interrogation scene where Malcolm has to improv a little bit about them being basically Sulabans. My next pick is the Travis Trip work on the Sulaban cell ship, where Trip gets his arm cloaked and Travis makes that movie night joke. And then my last pro is the X-Wing homage with the dogfight as they're going down to the planet. So that was a just cool visual effect sequence. What about you?
And your Porthos?
Oh, and my Porthos pick, it's that conversation where they're not whispering in the wood-clad bars jail cell, where they're talking about basically sacrificing themselves for an entire world, even though some of them want them dead. And that is a true mark of a hero. All that The heroics in the last fight with the phasers, all that action's cool. But the heroic decision in that jail cell is what makes Archer a hero for me. So that's my Porthos pick. And what about you, Abby? Take us through it.
All right. My first one was the relationship between Malcolm and Archer in this one and how as it connects back to their time on Minefield. My second one is about how the team back on Enterprise just kicks butt and they come together with that great plan to rescue everyone down on the planet and how this uses everybody in this. And my third one was the Archer and T'Pol chat at the end of the episode in the Ready Room. And my Porthos pick was about how this is really a cornerstone episode in the arc of needing a prime directive and a big turning point for Malcolm. So a really nice piece of connective tissue.
My chronometer's running backwards, sir.
Incoming transmission.
You read my letter?
We want to remind you that we absolutely adore getting feedback, and we look at all of it, and we love getting thoughts from you, our listeners. We collect them, and starting this season, every few months, we will do a mailbag episode where we share and discuss your thoughts and insights and ideas. So please drop us a line whenever you have something you'd like to share. You might be featured on our next mailbag show, and sometimes you even get to see the pictures of the food that I usually go on and on about. So always a good reason to check out us on the socials.
Absolutely. And speaking of socials, if you want to continue the discussion with us or share your Porthos pick or Grappler rating or any other thoughts, you can reach us at First Flight Pod on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can reach me personally at Shelf Nerds or on my YouTube channel, Completing the Shelf. And Abby, what's the best place to reach you?
Best place to find me is still on Twitter at Abby M. Summer. That's SOMMER. I'm dipping my toe into Mastodon here and there too, so if you happen to catch me around there, say hi.
Well, we want to thank you for spending this time with us. We'll be back next time with Singularity, the 9th episode of Season 2. And as always, we leave you with this quote from Captain Jonathan Archer and your moment of melody.
The most profound discoveries are not necessarily beyond that next star. They're within us, woven into the threads that bind us, all of us, to each other.